Hello, all, and welcome. I had some questions last week when we put out our essential standard chart, so I thought that I would go through a standard and break it down, and hopefully, by doing so, would answer some of your questions. First off, the chart that we gave you last week came from Mike Matos, and looking at different charts throughout our district, some of them were very in depth, and I thought this one was a little more simplified, and I was hoping that would be something that would really help you sort of break down the standard, and I'll go through why the areas are in there as we go through this. So there's 6 areas to our chart: description of standard, which I'll go through in a minute, example of rigor, prerequisite skills, when is it taught, common summative assessment, and extension standards. So first off is the description of the standard. So as we're looking at this 8th grade math standard, the description would be: know and apply the properties of integer exponents to generate equivalent numerical expressions. Now, if I'm a parent and I'm looking at that, or somebody who is not an educator, that's probably blowing my mind. So what we do is, so the students understand and kind of know the steps of the standard and what we're teaching, we obviously need to break that standard out into what skills we want our students to know. So when I was looking at this standard, the first one, students will be able to raise negative numbers to a power. So that is the first skill that I found when looking at that standard. Secondly, students will be able to recognize that negative numbers raised to an even power produce different products when parentheses are used. So when you start adding parentheses, that's going to create different products as they move through those formulas. Students will be able to identify the base and exponent. So that's something that that I know is a skill that they must know in order to get through this standard. And lastly, I had students will be able to use multiplication strategies to demonstrate the meanings of exponents. So when 2 exponents are multiplied together, what does that mean to that formula? So those are 4 areas. I know there's probably more skills, I can statements I could probably grab from that standard, but those were the 4 I came up with last night when I was looking at this standard. Now, example of rigor. This is actually a very basic formula, and I'm sure my math department would agree, but these carets here are actually exponents. So when you're looking at this, those are actually to a certain power. So 5 cubed times 5 to the square root of 4 equals 5 cubed plus the square root of 4. So that equals, when we break that out, is 5 to the square root of 7. So that would be one example of a formula or rigor that I would expect our students to know, every student to know. Okay? And then as you go through, you could put more formulas in, or you may have a document that you already plan to use, or a sample lesson plan that you already plan to use with examples of rigor on there. So feel free to link that into this column here as you work through those. All right, next is the prerequisite skills. Why is prerequisite skills so important? First off, it helps us identify what our students' background knowledge is when looking at the standard. It also, as we go into vertical, hopefully in the next year or two, and we're working with, for us, the middle school, getting to know when something was taught. And was it essential to 6th grade when it was taught? Or was it something that they just learned once in a class setting and they probably had forgotten? Those are things that I need to know when I'm planning for the standard and teaching the standard to my students. So students first work with whole number exponents in 6th grade. I was able to identify that. At this grade level, students will build upon that knowledge to understand the properties of integer exponents and numerical bases and patterns of repeated multiplication and division. Students use their understanding of exponent as repeated multiplication to develop and create equivalent expressions. But in 8th grade, that is the first time students raise negative numbers to a power, so that's something I need to know. That is not a background skill that they would have coming into class. So the prerequisite skill gives us the background knowledge, but it's also going to help us vertically align our standards as we move forward. Also in high school, there may be something that I'm teaching in Algebra 2 that, for instance, I want to know, was it dug deep in Algebra 1? Being that we're all in the same PLC together, that's something, a conversation that can happen very easily. Next is just when it's taught. So as you're working through your essential standards, what was taught in September that you found very essential? So as you're working through the chart, it should go through your standards in a line, kind of a timeline as we're going through the year, and when that standard is taught. So that helps us plan. It helps us also know, kind of keep in the know of when something's taught. It also helps us narrow down how many essential standards may be taught in a semester. Now, keep in mind, we're talking essential standards. We're talking about the need to know standards, not the nice to know. That doesn't mean that we are not going to teach other standards, but these are the need to knows. If they're coming to me in algebra, I need these many standards that they have been taught in middle school to come to me. Those are things that, like, when I'm talking to the middle school, those are things that I'm driving home with those teachers, saying this is stuff that these students must know. So don't spend 2 days on it. Maybe spend a week or two. Drive this standard home, okay, or this skill. All right, common and summative assessment. Do not get caught on the common part of this section, and don't get caught on summative either, because it's not just we don't have a lot of common assessments here, and it doesn't just mean summative either. In fact, when I was working with the instructional team yesterday, I really wanted to just move this to assessment. So in your charts, feel free to just put assessments as the heading. So what assessments will be used to measure student mastery or proficiency? All right. First, I will do a formative assessment, check for understanding, 3 questions after lesson 1. So I am putting here that I will go through a lesson with my students, and then I will have an exit slip with 3 questions at the end of my lesson to see, did my students understand the lesson, or do I need to dig deeper? So when students come back to class and I've regrouped those exit slips and I'm going through saying, okay, proficient, didn't get it, not proficient, not even close. So I might have 3 stacks and I'm just going through the exit slips, boom, 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 and I'm able to stack. Then I would come back in my format and regroup students on the second day and guide students working in groups. So I'm going to have some problems on the board with students that got it and that students that didn't, and I'm going to have them working together when we start the lesson the next day, and I'm just guiding around and checking again to see, are my students getting it, not getting it. So another way to guide instruction and also give formative assessment as I'm moving through my lesson that day. So padding in maybe in the next few days, I'm going to start working in those extension skills. So hopefully my students are starting to better understand that standard, and now I want to layer on more extension skills with those groups. So we'll work in extension skills within those groups after they work through a set of problems. We will do a whole group Quizlet review, and I will have a unit test in 3 weeks, and this section will be covered with 10 questions to see if the standard was met. So I've got a review in there again to check and be able to gauge my students on their understanding, and then we will take a test. Now, looking at a unit test, I may have 30, 40 questions on there, but I, in my mind, have marked or sectioned this standard within that test. So I'm able to give 10 questions, and I'm able to grab the data from that assessment and look at it. So how many of my students got 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10, which we would consider to be proficient, 7 out of 10, 6 out of 10, and on down. So that data then I can take to my PLC and have that conversation. When all this stuff is done, our planning is done, and we're at that point, I'm able to take that data in when I teach the standard and say, okay, 50% of my kids were proficient on the standard. They're still not where I want them to be. I'm going to spend another day or 2 on this. What are some suggestions? Here's what I've done instruction-wise for these students. Is there some suggestions that you have or some background knowledge or vocabulary that I'm missing with our students that I can better help them with? So that's when our PLCs are at full throttle. We're looking at data. We know what the standard is, and we're having conversations around instruction. So this is our precursor to hopefully getting to that point within our PLCs. All right. Lastly is the extension standard. So I started adding negative numbers, negative exponents into these formulas here. And so I'm really looking at diving deeper into those extension standards, maybe grouping in different formulas, really going heavy on that standard with the students so that I can see and really push the ones that are already proficient. We don't want them just sitting around for 3 days teaching other students, but how can we raise their level as well? All right. So the other question I had with this chart is that, well, we have this chart, but yet we had this other chart earlier this year. What's up with that? And that chart was the chart with readiness, endurance, and leverage. That chart is definitely still in play, and it's there to help you. When you think about the essential standard and just what it is that is essential, that chart is there to help you. Okay? So looking at the criteria, this is a breakdown of what those are. So first is readiness. The standard may be essential if it provides students with essential knowledge and skills necessary for success in the next class, course, or grade level. Now, don't get stuck on just the next class. Think about it as especially in high school, a wider scope. How are we getting them college ready, career ready? Now, as freshmen, we're probably looking at the upper level courses. But as junior, senior teachers in this building, we're looking at college and career readiness as well. So it's deeper than just the next class. Endurance. The standard may be essential if it provides students with knowledge and skills that are useful beyond a single test or unit of study. So is this something, if I'm a middle school teacher and we're having the vertical conversations, is this something that is essential and has endurance, something they're going to see multiple times in the next grade levels, in 8th grade, maybe in Algebra 2, and so on? If it has a lot of endurance, it is probably, or it is an essential standard. The next one's assessment. Now, I left that off your charts this year because that A for assessment, we don't know about the state test right now. So as we grab those inventories and we're looking at the data and seeing what kids missed what on the test in the next few years, that column will come into play, and that might grab a skill or something that we deem that a lot of our kids are missing that we want to really bring home and essentialize in our curriculum. Next is leverage. The standard may be essential if it provides students with knowledge and skills that will be of value in multiple disciplines. So if I am teaching science and I'm teaching graphing, is that graphing something that has leverage that I could deem essential that the students would need in, say, Algebra 2? That's just one example. Obviously, our ELA standards can be taught in many formats and many classes. So does it have leverage? Is it taught across multiple disciplines? All right. Lastly, I had some teachers talk to me about some stress levels with the new chart and different things like that. And I hope I eased your mind in telling you this is not work that has a due date. This is just the work that we have to do and that we need to do. So don't stress out about this being done by Christmas or by the end of the year. As you're working through and you're already planning and you know these standards in your head, this chart will help you, and we can just start putting those in as we're working through our year. So ideally, it would be nice to see these charts close to done by the end of the school year, but this is something that we'll always be working on and tweaking, but we are going to have it in a place, and it is going to be there for a very long time so that we can continue our work and continue looking at those things. All right. This is my first time doing Screencast-O-Matic. Natalie told me about this program, so I want to thank her for that. Hopefully I've answered some questions today. We are always here to help. I'll be around in some PLCs as well, so keep the questions coming. Keep the work flowing. You all are doing a wonderful job. Take care.